Long-run production function. The core difference between long run and short run is that all inputs can vary in the long run. The question here is how short is the short run and how long is the long run? This varies from industry to industry. For some industries, short run can be as short as a few weeks or a few months, but for situations such as a country installing an hydroelectric power station, which may take almost 10 years or a decade to install, this will still be called short run. Why? Because capital is still fixed for the entire period. How does technology impact businesses in the long run? Technology can change and alter the way entire production process is organized, including the nature of products themselves. Societies that are characterized by rapid technological processes have a very small gap between long and short run because technological changes are extremely rapid. What happens when technology alters and changes the processes in the long run, or as a consequence of shrinking period between the short and the long run, the firms become more efficient. Therefore, the cost curves downwards since the firms are more efficient as a consequence of new technology. Is it possible to decrease cost in the long run? Yes, it is. Firms find a way to lower their cost structures over time, and one way in which they do it is by increasing the amount of capital used relative to labor. As a consequence, factor productivity also increases. It means productivity of all the factors of production combined goes up. For example, the use of robots in car assembly plants and computer-aided production methods are good examples of how costs can be reduced. But why do firms try to lower their costs? Firms try to lower their costs so that they may not lose their market share to their competitors if they are operating in a perfectly competitive market. Only the firms that are operating in a perfectly competitive market need to lower their costs so that they may offer their products and services at the most competitive prices. Firms operating in other kinds of market structures may or may not have the motivation to lower their prices that we are going to observe when we study monopoly and oligopolistic, in short, imperfect market structures in detail. The long run average cost curve, just like the short run average cost curve, is also U shaped but is flatter as compared to the short run average cost curve. This part of the LRAC indicates falling costs in the long run, but after the firm hits a certain output level, say Q, the costs will start to rise. This situation where costs start to fall is called economies of scale, and this situation where costs start to rise are called diseconomies of scale. The shape of LRAC is derived from a series of short-run situations. For example, if this LRAC is for, say, 4 years or 5 years or multiple years, there will be certain short runs in this entire long run period. When the firm hits the lowest possible cost in the short run, at that point the SRAC is tangent to LRAC curve, which does not at all mean that at every point in time where SRAC is tangent to the long run average cost curve, the firm is producing at the lowest possible cost. Because we can see that if a firm is producing at this level, it is not the lowest possible cost because there is no point tangent to SRAC at this point. Also at this point, they are producing at this cost, which is not the lowest possible cost. At this point, they are producing at this cost, and so on. That is why we can say that it's not so that they are producing at the lowest possible cost at all times. LRAC curve is the lowest possible average cost for each level of output where the factors of production are all variable. This curve is also called the envelope curve because it envelopes a series of short run average cost curves. SRAC will never touch LRAC at the beginning. It will touch LRAC as output increases. Also, as LRAC is declining in the long run till a certain point of output, it allows firms to lower their prices without sacrificing their profits. That way, they will be able to offer their goods at competitive prices and not be thrown out of the market because their competitors are offering goods for price lower than theirs. Let's move forward to the concept of minimum efficient scale. It's the point where companies can produce their goods at the lowest possible cost and achieve economies of scale. Economies of scale is when the company experiences declining costs with the increase in output. It's necessary for companies to achieve this point where they can produce goods and services at the lowest possible cost, enabled to survive in a competitive market. It's the balance point at which a company can produce goods at a competitive prices and enables them to survive in a highly competitive market where there are several sellers and several buyers. It is achieved in the long run, always. It's the point on the company's LRAC curve where economies of scale have been exhausted and constant returns to scale begin. Constant returns to scale means that it's a point where the company's inputs like capital and labor increase at the same rate as their outputs. Constant returns to scale means that the factors of production such as capital and labor increase at the same rate as their output. For example, if factors of production have been doubled, the output also doubles. So the ratio of factors of production to output is 1, or it stays constant. It does not change. Why is it important to calculate constant returns to scale? It helps companies measure the correlation between their inputs and outputs to notice how their processes are affecting the average cost of production in the long run. If a company is experiencing constant returns to scale, that is the goal of most companies because it means that their investments are generating consistent returns. As they invest more capital, resources, and labor into a project, they begin to see the benefits return to them at the same rate. If it's constant, this is not a bad sign for the company. If it's increasing, then it's a very good sign. And if it's decreasing, then it's a bad sign for the companies. Many factors go into minimum efficient scale and can change with time, forcing a revaluation of overall costs. Companies try to evaluate and reevaluate their minimum efficient scale in order to assess whether they are still experiencing economies of scale or they are moving towards diseconomies of scale. At this point on the minimum efficient curve, the resources are all exhausted, and after this point, the company starts experiencing diseconomies of scale, means the costs start increasing as the inputs increase. Having talked about economies and diseconomies of scales, let's have a look at it in detail. Economies and diseconomies of scale can only be observed on the LRAC curve because the firm experiences both of them in the long run as it increases its scale of production or it starts to grow in size in terms of output. Initially, the long run average costs they start to decline because of certain factors. However, after the company reaches or hits a certain point of production, these costs start to rise. Till the point where the costs decline, that point is called economies of scale. And after the point where costs start to increase, that point is called diseconomies of scale. In the period where company is experiencing economies of scale, average costs fall as output increases, and in times of diseconomies of scale, average cost rises as output increases. The point after which the average cost starts increasing, that's the point where the company is experiencing the lowest average total cost of output, where productive efficiency is achieved. In the time where company is experiencing economies of scales, they are experiencing increasing returns to scale, which means that for a small increase in input, the increase in output is larger. And after hitting the lowest possible average cost, the company stays in constant returns to scale period. Constant returns to scale period means the output and input they both increase by the same proportion. However, after hitting the lowest possible cost and then staying in state of constant returns to scale, the firm starts to experience decreasing returns to scale, which means that the increase in output is less as compared to increase in input. Let's combine the minimum efficient scale and the LRAC curve. Minimum efficient scale can be observed on LRAC curve where there are several SRACs tangent to LRAC. Till a certain output is achieved, the firm enjoys economies of scales where costs are lowered, then it stays in constant returns to scale situation, and then as the company grows beyond this point, they will start to experience declining returns to scale as well as diseconomies of scale. The entire explanation says the same thing. Types of economies of scale. There are internal and external economies of scale. It means that there are internal factors as well as external factors that can cause economies as well as diseconomies of scale. What are factors that lead to economies of scale or reduce costs in the long run? Number one is financial economies, managerial economies, marketing economies, purchasing economies, technical economies, and risk bearing economies. What are the factors that lead to diseconomies of scales or increase in costs in the long run? Those are management diseconomies, communication diseconomies, graphical diseconomies, and cultural diseconomies. Internal economies of scale measure a company's efficiency of production and occur because of the factors controlled by its management, means the factors are all internal. External economies of scale take place because of larger changes within the industry. So when the industry grows, the average costs of the business drops. Internal economies of scale offer greater competitive advantage because an external economy of scale is shared among competitors, means all the competitors enjoy benefits offered by the external factors or overall growth in the industry. An internal economy of scale measures efficiency of production. That efficiency is attained as the company improves output when the average cost per product drops. This type of economy of scale is a consequence of company's size and is controlled by its management teams, such as workforce, production measures, and machinery. The factors, therefore, are independent of the entire industry. Technical and purchasing economies of scale are examples of internal economies of scale. Technical economies of scale occur when the firm employs large scale capital machines or production processes through which they achieved reduced costs through improved processes. The classic example of a technical internal economy of scale is the assembly line of Henry Ford. Purchasing economies of scale occur when the firm purchases in bulk and receives discount for their large purchases or a lower cost per unit of input. External economies of a scale are benefit that the firms receive in an industry as a direct consequence of growth of that industry. This can be one of the reasons why most firms try to enter a particular industry, because they know that the growth in the industry will facilitate them to lower their costs in the long run. As a consequence, the long run average cost curve, it shifts downward as is seen in the graph. All firms in the industry enjoy the benefits and advantages of external economies of scale. Those advantages may be a pool of skilled labor, means skilled labor is available to work in those industries. Also, convenient supply of components and services from specialist producers that have grown up to provide for all the firms in that area. Also, all the firms might have greater access to research, knowledge, and better transport infrastructure. Improved technological or transport infrastructure can come from general expansion of firms and can result in lower logistics costs for all the firms. Sources of external economies of scale. Number one is geographic cluster, means as the industry grows, all the firms move closer to ancillary firms, which are the firms providing necessary support to the primary activities or general operations of an organization, system, etc. This lowers the long run average total cost. Next is transport links. Improved transport links develop around growing industries in order to help get people to work and to improve the transport logistics. Next is skilled labor, means a pool of skilled labor is available to work in the growing industries and all the firms can benefit from them. Next is favorable legislation. When the firms and the industry has the potential to grow, then the government also supports certain industries to achieve their wider objectives, and that favorable legislation helps them lower their costs in the long run, means there are no regulatory costs that they have to bear, licensing costs and other kinds of costs. Diseconomies of scale. As explained earlier, diseconomies of scale is a situation where the long run average costs start increasing for the firm. There's a limit to economies of scale, and after a certain point of output, the costs will start to increase as the output rises. Efficiency is also compromised in this entire part of the curve. What are the sources of diseconomies of scale? Number one source is communication and management issues. As the company grows in size, it becomes more difficult to manage it and to coordinate with employees. For example, if a company is operating in multiple countries and is in an industry which is highly dynamic, they need to take decisions quickly, but as there is time difference of zones, for example, communication may become a problem. Also, there may be difference in how people communicate in both the countries, so there may be an issue in properly explaining what is expected or what is needed. Another issue is timely coordination. Communication impacts costs in a way that poor communication can compromise morale of the workforce. As the morale of the workforce comes down, productivity also comes down. Individual productivity impacts overall productivity of the organization. As the productivity of the organization comes down, costs start increasing. Poor coordination leads to workers feeling left out and unvalued and unheard. Research suggests that employees who feel that they do not belong in the organization and or they are an insignificant part of the organization, their satisfaction levels are quite low. When employee satisfaction is low, consequently employee morale will be low and hence productivity will be low, which will impact overall productivity and cost for the organization. These are certain factors that are normally overlooked as the firm increases its scale of operations, which means that they expand in size and grow with increasing output. Along with internal diseconomies of scale, there are external diseconomies of scale as well. Traffic congestion that can increase distribution costs as the fuel cost increases if transportation passes through a lot of traffic congestion. Land shortages and therefore rising fixed costs are an example of external diseconomies of scale. And another example of external diseconomies of scale is shortage of skilled labor and therefore rising variable cost. Because if there's shortage of skilled labor, the desired labor will demand higher wages that would ultimately add to the cost for the firm as their output increases. They would have to employ more people as they grow in their output, and if they are employing expensive labor, their costs will increase.